Hey everybody, I'm Jesse Weber and welcome back to Law and Crime Now. We have a jam-packed show for you. We're going to talk about the video surrounding the death of George Floyd that has gone absolutely viral. New updates in the Lori Vallow and Robert Durst cases. There's a new Netflix documentary about Jeffrey Epstein that has dropped today, and we're going to have an interview with the director of that. But before we get into anything, we have to start with the new developments in the AHMAUD Arbery shooting out of Georgia, a case that we've been following very closely. As you know, that this cell phone footage capturing this February killing was ultimately led to the arrests and charging of 3 individuals, the McMichaels, who've been charged with murder and aggravated assault. And last week, William Bryan, the man who recorded the video, was arrested and charged with murder and false imprisonment. But the story doesn't end there, because we've learned that the Department of Justice has launched their own investigation and have considered filing hate crime charges in this case, on top of the fact that the investigators and the people surrounding this whole case are being investigated for why it took so long, for 2 months, for charges to ultimately be brought. Now, I want to go back to when we listened to that GBI press conference, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. We heard Director Vic Reynolds speak about the status of the GBI's investigation into possible misconduct. Here's what he had to say.
The question is what the status is regarding the investigation that we've been asked to do about potential prosecutorial misconduct. As you recall, we were asked by the Attorney General's office to conduct a separate and distinct investigation into that. The Bureau is doing that. I don't have a timeline on that, but I do anticipate it's not going to take us much longer to finish it. Once that's completed, what will procedurally happen is we will turn that file over to the Attorney General's office. They will be the deciding agency or entity in what, if anything, happens in that regard. Our agents, a separate team of agents, are conducting that investigation. And again, I don't have a definitive timeline, but I am confident in telling you that I don't anticipate it will be much longer until we're through with that as well.
All right, I'm joined right now by New York Law School Professor Kirk Burkhalter, as well as Law and Crime's own Linda Kenney Baden and Brian Buckmire. It's great to have everybody here. Brian, I want to start with you. Can you tell us, what do we know about the status of these investigations by state and federal authorities? I mean, what do you think is going to happen here? Are they going to file hate crime charges? What do you think is going to happen?
I think at this point, Jesse, we're going to see more facts start to develop. What I think could happen, I don't know if this is going to be a hate crime as yet. The facts haven't led themselves there as yet. I do understand the dynamics of it being 3 white men chasing down a black male, but this seems to be more in line of them falsely believing he was a burglar rather than his race. However, we're also hearing information that might lead us to the fact that there might be some sort of hate-filled animus in these men prior to this. Now, some of it could be fake news, some of it could be correct, but depending on how that all lays out, could be the way that this hate crime investigation goes.
Professor, if federal hate crime charges are levied against the McMichaels, maybe even Mr. Bryan, are those tough to defend against? Are they tough to prosecute traditionally?
I would say that they are a little bit more difficult to prosecute. The reason being is that there must be some form of intentionality. And that's always the rub with hate crime charges and what makes them so difficult. So unless you have the smoking gun in the sense that someone was wearing some type of garb that states their hatred for a particular group, or they make a statement to that effect, it's difficult to prove. As Brian pointed out, while animus may it may seem to be apparent here, that's not enough to get past that hurdle. Hate crimes are intentional, and in most cases, there would have had to have been some type of statement or clear evidence of animus against a particular group.
Well, I'll say, we know the GBI investigated. They looked into the McMichaels' home. Still don't know what they found in there, so maybe they are finding evidence and sharing it with federal authorities. We'll see. Linda, let me ask you this. If the McMichaels are hit with these really, really tough charges that carry even more significant punishment, does that give you a sense they might try to work out a plea deal? It's kind of a situation where somebody's hit with the highest crime. All right, maybe if you accept this, I'll go a little bit lower and admit to what I did.
Well, it's interesting, Jesse, because you would have 2 issues here because you have both the state prosecution, possibly, and the federal prosecution, correct? Even though they have been arrested, they haven't been indicted yet on either. So if you're going to say, I'm going to work out a deal with the feds, but you're still then going to face charges with the state, it's really hard given the fact that we have this sovereignty. That doesn't mean that it's double jeopardy. That means they could have deals in both situations, but both deals do not run concurrent, and therefore their time is huge.
Well, it's something interesting to think about. And look, I want to go back to William Bryant because he was arrested last week. Was it a shock to everybody? Did people expect it? There were calls for his arrest. And I'll go back to Vic Reynolds, once again, the director of the GBI, who said this to say about when it was time to ultimately arrest William Bryant.
Are you able to tell us what was the last straw that made you make this third arrest?
You know, I don't know if there was a proverbial last straw. I will tell you that in conducting an investigation, what I would ask folks to remember is that we don't go into a situation of this nature investigating a person or persons. We go in investigating a set of facts. And once we start turning stones over, sometimes there's one or two stones underneath there that need to be turned over. And once we reached a point, and it was probably sometime Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening, when we began speaking with our folks there, that we reached the point in conjunction with the 5th District Attorney's Office that we were convinced probable cause existed to make those charges. We proceeded to do that yesterday. It wasn't a proverbial last moment of epiphany or anything of that nature. It was just an accumulation of various things that were there and various things we discovered over the last 16 days. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Bryan continuously said he was nothing more than a witness and did not know the McMichaels. Were you all able to determine that Mr. Bryan did know the McMichaels through any set of texts or conversations? Can you speak to how you determined those relationships?
I will say this, again, not to speak on the facts. They'll come out in a court of law, but I can tell you that if we believed he was a witness, we wouldn't have arrested him. So there's probable cause that we're calling for that. Yes, sir.
Brian, over to you. What was your reaction to the arrest of William Bryant? Because Kevin Goff, who's representing Brian, he appeared on CNN, said his client bears no responsibility for the death of Arbery. He's completely innocent, committed no crime, looking forward to a speedy trial. Your reaction to that?
It made perfect sense to me, Jesse, for him to be arrested. I'm looking at the police report where Gregory McMichael says that William Bryant, or it says Rhodey, which is his nickname, was a part of this chase and in fact tried to close off AHMAUD Arbery's escape. So therefore he's aiding and abetting or acting in concert, we might say, in New York. And then, as you say, in that CNN interview, that was, as a defense attorney, it was cringeworthy. I was shaking afterwards because I can't imagine how a defense attorney would put their client in that kind of light, answering some of the more mundane questions, but avoiding some of the larger ones that everyone wanted to know.
So, Professor, I mean, what are you looking out for next with Brian? At this point, if you were representing him, what is the next steps? Because, look, we live in a COVID-19 era. A speedy trial might not be happening so quickly. What steps do you think his defense team are making at this point?
Well, what he needs to do is he's going to have to get his story straight. So let me first put on my police hat. As you know, as a detective here in New York for 20 years, first thing that hit my mind and always bothered me with him was, why were you here? It's not like he was in the middle of Times Square and happened to take his phone out. So there has to be a viable reason. Is this somewhere that you travel regularly? Are you normally in this area? Why were you here at this particular time? And why did you spend so much time filming this crime? Don't forget that this trial will take place in front of a jury. So there are certain standards of proof that have to be adhered to, but ultimately he's going to be judged by 12 men and women of his peers. So I think that's the largest hurdle. I think the statement that he attempted to block the victim's path with his car is really going to hurt him. Don't know how he's going to get over that. I would suspect, like many defendants do, he might backtrack over some of these statements, because obviously he wasn't arrested initially at the time of the incident. Took a couple of months, and then after video surfaced. So I would suspect we might see him backtrack a little bit on his stories, because after all, none of these statements were made under oath. But I do think it'll be a little bit difficult for him, given that he's charged with attempted false imprisonment, and that's what led to the felony murder charge.
Exactly right. That false imprisonment led to the death of Arbery, felony murder. Linda, going to ask you again about a deal. You know, they talked about him being such an important witness, could he be the state's star witness? Could he take a deal and testify against the McMichaels? We have about 40 seconds, Linda.
I am smelling DEAL. That's why his attorney went on that interview. It didn't obviously to say he's not guilty, but obviously to set him up to say, I have this information. Here's my poor guy. He doesn't have an education, says his attorney. So government, come let him testify. Give this poor guy a deal.
And we'll have to see what happens. But when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the Arbery case and also focus on the George Floyd death. We'll be right back. And welcome back, everybody. We're talking about the shooting of AHMAUD Arbery out of Georgia, and it has been announced that the 3 men who've been charged in connection with his death are going to face a preliminary hearing on June 4th. We're going to get into that in a second, but we talk so much about the defendants, we can't forget that about Mr. Arbery and his family. Now, Ms. Holmes, who is actually the prosecuting attorney, who after all the other attorneys have recused themselves, she's going to be prosecuting this case or plans to prosecute this case. She had this to say during the GBI's press conference last week upon the arrest of William Bryan about her conversations with Arbery's family.
I have spoken to the family. We started those conversations on the day that our office was appointed to handle this case. We've continued those conversations along with our team. They know and are aware that we have victim advocates in our office that are assigned specifically to their family to help them through the process so that they understand step by step what we are going to be doing. And so most of our conversations have been about that. A request also to help us to get to know AHMAUD. So as we go through this process, we can make sure that as the facts and the law come together, that we're doing the right thing by the case.
All right, Brian, I want to turn it over to you. This preliminary hearing that's set for the McMichaels and Bryan on June 4th. Our viewers out there are wondering what we can expect, because this is going to be something the world will be watching.
So we've already done the bond hearing as to see whether or not they have the ability to bail out with either cash or bond or partial secured bond. The preliminary hearing is most likely, if it's the same in New York, is going to be whether or not the prosecutor can present enough information to go forward on this case. It's kind of like a grand jury, but in this sense, there is no grand jury because we cannot impanel people together because of COVID-19. Think of it like a trial, but instead of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, that's called the preponderance of the evidence, which I tell my clients is kind of like 51% chance, or do they more than likely commit this crime?
Linda, let me ask you, death penalty, life in prison, it's an option that the prosecutors are weighing. What do you think they're thinking at this point?
I don't think they're going to go after the death penalty. That's just my reaction because there's a lot of other factors to consider. However, having said that, this preliminary hearing, if it goes forward, which is a big if, will give us a lot of information about what the prosecutor is thinking on that, Jesse. If I were the defense, and I don't think I have a great case for the public right now, I don't want to have my name in the news again on this, I would waive that preliminary hearing, let them bring in information, and let's go from there.
Well, we're going to wait and see what happens on that preliminary hearing, and maybe we'll be able to cover it here on Law&Crime. Now, we're going to switch gears and focus on another disturbing video that came out. And this one is out of Minnesota. This is really disappointing. I don't know if anybody's seen this. I mean, it's really been quite viral, and it's very disturbing. So I warn our viewers right now. There's this video of Minneapolis police detaining a man named George Floyd. They were called to respond to a forgery in progress. According to the police, he resisted arrest, and as a result, one of the officers rammed his knee on the back of Floyd's neck. Now, onlookers would come there. They would start filming, yelling at the police, and later on, Floyd would die. He would actually die at the hospital. Now, the autopsy results haven't been released as of yet, but the 4 officers who were involved have been terminated. Now, I want to go to this video. Again, I warn you, highly disturbing. Here's a portion of it.
Well, you got him down, man. Let him breathe, at least, man. I can't breathe. I've been trying to help out. So you breathe a little bit more. Put a hand on your neck, man. One of my homies died. He went back on these cars.
I'm about to die, just say.
Relax.
Man, I can't breathe in my face. Just get up.
What do you want?
I can't breathe. Please, the knee in my neck. I can't breathe shit.
Bro, get in the car, man.
I will.
Get in the car.
I can't move.
I've been waiting the whole time, man. Get up and get in the car.
Mama.
Get up and get in the car right.
I can't.
I gave y'all the opportunity to get in, bro. I told you can't win.
My knee.
You can't win, man.
I'm through.
I know you're a nigga. You didn't listen.
That's the food. My stomach hurts. My neck hurts. Everything hurts. Get some water or something. Please. Please. I can't breathe, officer.
Shut up.
They're gonna kill me. They're gonna kill me, man.
Bro, with your feet on his neck, man, you get out the
His nose is bleeding. Like,
yeah,
come on now.
That's raw right there with his feet on his neck.
Look at his nose.
You just seen your knee on his neck. Yeah, you got your feet right on his neck, officer. He ain't even resisting arrest.
I cannot breathe.
You just a grown, you're a tough guy. You're a tough guy, huh? I say you're a tough guy. You're not even resisting arrest, bro.
His whole nose is
Fought with him? Bro, but why you just sitting there? He ain't doing nothing now. Put him in the car.
They'll kill me.
How long y'all gotta hold him down?
This is why you don't do drugs, kids. It ain't about drugs, bro. Y'all understand that?
Y'all don't gotta put y'all right.
He is human, bro.
His nose is
But I'm saying you
bleeding.
can put him in the car. That's some
We
bum
tried
ass
that
shit.
for 10 minutes.
That's some bum ass shit, bro. That's some bum ass shit, bro.
Wow. Professor, I want to start with you. CBS obtained the following footage. We're going to show it right now. It's from surveillance footage from a store that was nearby. And it shows the moment right before the officer put his knee on the back of Floyd's neck. And the question, of course, is, was he resisting arrest? Was it necessary to do this? And with your law enforcement background, have you ever seen anything quite like this? I mean, when we talk about it, because the officers in that video, and what struck me so much, is they seemed so strong, so justified in what they were doing. So talk about if this was a proper use of police force.
In my opinion, based on my experience, absolutely not. And I've never seen anything like it. Mr. Floyd was executed without the benefit of being booked, arraigned, having a trial, or any preliminary hearings like we discussed previously. Now, that video clearly showed, the second video, that he was handcuffed and restrained. People do resist, even though they are handcuffed. But it's difficult, if not impossible, for someone to present a lethal threat when they are handcuffed behind their back. Even so, once he was on the ground, again, he was fully restrained and even complaining about his inability to breathe and so forth. This was above and beyond the necessary level of force. And just two additional points. Why is this so heinous? One, it erodes the public trust in the police department. And two, it dishonors the overwhelming majority of police officers who would probably lay down their lives to save another and do their jobs in the most professional manner. So I don't see any justification here. I'm sure these officers are going to argue in some way, shape, or form they were justified and they had to use reasonable force. This doesn't even approach the level of reasonable force.
And that's a very good point, and point well taken. Brian, talking about the officers, they were terminated, but what about charges that they may face?
Yeah, so they could face charges. At first, I thought potentially manslaughter, but then you look at the video, and the part that we're missing there is that there are two other officers holding down George Floyd. And that one officer with his knee on his neck is leaning forward with his force into his neck. So when you look at that amount of force being used, the fact that he passes out, he being George Floyd, about 4 minutes into that video, and about 4 minutes after that, when the EMS comes in and tries to check his pulse, that knee is still on his neck, what the police would call a neck restraint, which they believe is non-deadly force, even though it's stopping the flow of oxygen to the brain from here. When you use that in an aggravating sense, that gets really close to murder and further away from manslaughter.
Well, let me ask you, Linda, the autopsy results are pending. The police have said that he died as a result of a medical incident. What does that tell you?
Certainly was a medical incident. It was like a snuff film. Okay, Jesse, let's just start. Police always say resisting arrest. And then when this man is down on the ground, as Brian points out, he's not only not able to breathe because his carotid artery is being compressed as you would in a chokehold, he can't breathe because his whole body and his chest is being pressed into the sidewalk. I'm leaning down. If you can't have that that ability to breathe, because other officers are on your back, on your legs. You're not breathing from anything. Your oxygen's going down. When his nose starts bleeding, it's showing that he's got pressure into his brain. You know, he just is dying in front of us. It is atrocious, and we have to stop justifying this, that could be a resisting arrest, or maybe he forged a check. This was a stuff film, and it really should be prosecuted to the fullest extent, in my opinion, having been a prosecutor and a defense attorney.
Well, what's so eerie is we have another case of cell phone footage coming out that really puts a light onto these shootings or onto these killings. And it's just something that there's no words for it. And we're going to see what happens. We're going to see if charges are ultimately filed against these officers. But at the very least, the police department has not sided with them. They have fired them. And as of right now, I haven't heard a comment from the police union. But by all points, this does not look good for those 4 officers. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, a lot more to discuss. Stay
When the case first broke, Shanann and Cece and Bella were simply missing.
Like, I have no inclination to where they're at right now.
Something in your gut was telling you that he had something to do with it.
Chris Watts thought that he could go to the police department, knowing the fact that he killed his family.
Why should I believe you? Because I'm a very trustworthy person.
Breeze through a polygraph test.
You intend to answer all of the questions truthfully?
Yes.
And welcome back, everybody. A new Netflix documentary has dropped today called Jeffrey Epstein, Filthy Rich, which details the story of the disgraced financier and pedophile. It's a fascinating and yet disturbing study of the sexual abuse allegations, his death last year, and a lot more. Now, we have a snippet of it from the trailer. Take a look, and we'll talk about it on the other side with the director of this documentary. Now, again, I tell you, it's very, very interesting to look at this, because from our perspective, we all still want answers about what happened here. In the meantime, I think, you know what? I'll tell you what, we'll show you the trailer in a minute. Let's bring on Lisa Bryant, who's the director of this documentary. We have with us as well Terry Austin and Kathy Russin. Lisa, thanks so much for coming on. I want to start from the big allegation right now that came out in this documentary that President Bill Clinton had visited Jeffrey Epstein's island, the Little St. James, where it was believed that this island was where young girls were sexually abused. President Clinton has denied this. You've studied this. You made a documentary about it. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it's well known, and Bill Clinton himself will admit that they had an association in the past, and that's not disputed. He did distance himself immediately after Jeffrey Epstein was arrested in a statement which had said that he had never been to any of his properties. But we spoke to 2 witnesses, including one survivor, who in fact said that they spent time with him on the island. Now, there was no allegations of misconduct of any kind by President Clinton, by either of the witnesses we spoke to, but that is how, you know, the allegations are not allegations, but that came to be.
Well, I'll tell you what, I want to show the trailer to your documentary, and then on the other side, we'll talk about what might be the fallout from this. So let's show the trailer right now. Wow, Lisa. So I want to ask you from that last part, do you think that this documentary, we know that TV shows, documentaries are spawning a lot of interest right now, especially in COVID-19. It brings a new light, sometimes furthers investigations. Do you think that this could lead to maybe authorities taking a closer look at something that they didn't look at beforehand?
Well, I think certainly that's the hope, is that we're bringing awareness to what was going on in plain sight, that our officials did not do their jobs, and that money rules. And, you know, the abuse of wealth and power is so great in this story that we hope that, and we know that the FBI is looking at the co-conspirators, that it wasn't Jeffrey Epstein acting alone. So, yes, while, you know, the investigation is still unfolding, it's not something that the documentary could continue to follow. But the hope is that, you know, these women will see justice. And I think justice to them now is having some of these other co-conspirators, you know, brought to trial. People like Ghislaine Maxwell, Sarah Kellen, some of these other young women who are protected by the non-prosecution agreement that was from 2008 in his first sweetheart plea deal.
What was something that you learned while making this documentary that maybe a lot of people didn't know before? We all get an idea of the story, but what was something you learned?
I learned really a lot from these women, how strong and brave they are, and how fearful they were for so long, being silenced. I think we're very survivor focused. How brave they are, how damaged some of them still are, and that trauma is really something that you never get over. When you have something like that happen to you, and you're manipulated, and you're coerced, and sex trafficking, that's key elements that are so hard to overcome. That it's a lifelong healing process, and I believe that I really learned that the public needs to respect survivors who come forward. Not toss them aside and call them liars and prostitutes and things like that happened the first go around in the Jeffrey Epstein story. And that's my hope, is that people will have a new respect, for people like these brave women who came forward on our program.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's go to Gloria Allred, because she had a lot to say about Jeffrey Epstein when we were covering the Harvey Weinstein trial. And this is what she's had to say about what could come next.
The Justice Department, even though Mr. Epstein is deceased, is still conducting an investigation into who may have conspired, knowingly conspired with Mr. Epstein to sex traffic underage girls to him. So they're still interested, and Prince Andrew would have that information, might have that information. I don't know if he has. He certainly knows, since he stayed in homes in various of Mr. Epstein's properties, people who are going and coming and who might have been assisting in recruiting or facilitating underage girls to be with Mr. Epstein. So he could answer those questions if he wishes. So the time for excuses is done. It's finished. It's long overdue. The FBI, he doesn't need to come to the United States and be worried that I'll serve him with civil subpoenas for our ongoing lawsuits. He can just stay right there in the safety of the UK, and the FBI can interview him there. They have liaisons over there in London. So, I mean, victims deserve truth, and they deserve justice. They've had no justice so far, and it's time for them to at least get the truth.
Lisa, let's talk about Prince Andrew. Based upon what the research you conducted for the documentary, what is your stance on his role in the Jeffrey Epstein saga?
Well, again, he's one who has a known association, and he doesn't deny that he had a friendship with him. He has steadfastly denied allegations by one of the subjects in our documentary, Virginia Giuffre, who also, has stood by her allegations. We all know that Prince Andrew recently did an interview with the BBC that didn't make him look so good. And we were with Virginia actually that weekend, and we got her immediate reaction. And she was very disappointed in that he didn't at least give her some form of acknowledgement. I mean, the fact that Prince Andrew was saying, he had never met her, he has no idea, where that pic photo came from. I think that's all that she wanted, just some acknowledgement. She didn't expect a hands up, I'm guilty, I did it. Just unfortunately, I don't think she's ever going to get that, certainly from Prince Andrew. But we do have a witness in the series that you'll have to watch to see, has some pretty powerful things to say about Prince Andrew, who did see Prince Andrew grinding, as he describes it, on a topless woman who, he wasn't sure at the time who that woman was, but the FBI came knocking, on his door over in the Virgin Islands just after Jeffrey Epstein's arrest, and showed him hundreds of photos. He was a contract employee on the island, showed him hundreds of photos of many women trying to get, ideas of who else he might have seen there, and showed a picture of Prince Andrew, showed then a picture of Virginia Giuffre as a young woman, and he positively identified Prince Andrew as the man who he remembers grinding on this Virginia Giuffre all those years ago. So that is a revelation that I'm sure he was not thrilled to hear about. And we did ask for a response from Buckingham Palace, and they steadfastly deny and stay with their story. So, as journalists and documentarians, we, owe both sides a chance to tell, their truth. And I think it's very interesting, and you'll have to watch the documentary to see.
You'll have to watch and see. I mean, again, it also discusses the controversial death of Jeffrey Epstein as well, and how we should be thinking about this. Some believe suicide, some believe homicide. It's interesting to think about it. Lisa Bryant, thank you so much for coming on and speaking about your project with us. I know I'm going to watch it, so I hope everybody else out there watches it as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, we're going to switch gears and we're going to focus on Robert Durst. We have an update for you. As we know, the real estate heir is on trial for the murder of his friend Susan Berman. And it was a case that was going well until COVID-19 came, put a halt to it, stopped it. And the defense has moved for a mistrial, given this delay. But what we've just learned is that if this trial picks up, and the jury is scheduled to come back July 27th, this is going to go to a different courthouse. It's actually being moved to Inglewood, a larger courthouse, to adhere to these new social distancing guidelines. We'll get into that in a second. In the meantime, as a little recap of this case, here's the prosecution in the Robert Durst trial from a few months ago.
There's media out there saying all kinds of crazy things. What the evidence is going to show in this case is that although the murders that Bob Durst committed are horrible, they're not crazy, and they're not the signs of a deranged individual. What the evidence will show is that Bob Durst killed Kathy Durst in the midst of a nasty divorce. That he killed Susan Berman because he was afraid that Susan Berman was going to reveal what he knew. Now, the evidence will show that's not crazy. In fact, it was absolutely accurate. But what the evidence will also show is that Bob Durst killed her about 20 years too late because unbeknownst to him, she had already told her story to the numerous individuals that we've already presented. Morris Black and living in Galveston as a woman, again, this is not some crazy guy. This is somebody who's hiding, who thinks he's about to be charged, and Morris Black knew who he was able to connect him to his name and to New York. They were having issues and arguing about where Morris was going to live. And in the end, Bob Durst eliminated a problem. Cruel, illegal, immoral, homicidal, but not crazy.
All right, I'm here with Terry Austin and Kathy Russin to talk about the latest. Kathy, you've been following this case. You were in that courtroom. Well, now it's going to be in a different courtroom, Inglewood. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I had a long conversation with Prosecutor John Lewin about a week ago. And when he told me that if this trial does resume, it will be moved to the Inglewood courthouse. It has bigger courtrooms than the current courthouse. And the judge wants to move it there so he can allow for social distancing as well as the large media presence that was there. I can tell you when this case started, we were packed in like sardines in that small courtroom. And remember, there's 23 jurors. They had 11 alternates. So the jurors were packed in there. So he wants to move it to a bigger courtroom. Now, on June 23rd, the judge will hear the defense motion for mistrial. So if the judge grants that, then this will not resume on July 27th. And who knows when it will resume.
Well, let me ask you, Terry, we have about a minute left. Chances that the judge throws it out? Because the defense is making a good point. This delay, how could these jurors just jump right back into this case? So isn't there a serious concern this case will not begin again in July?
I think that according to the motion papers, they make a very good point. And here's the point. They've already had some evidence. They've had the openings. They've had a few witnesses. If you wait for months until having the trial because of COVID-19, who's to say that the jurors are going to remember whatever evidence has already been presented or even what the openings stated early on? So, we might just have a mistrial here because of that very issue. It's an excellent point.
Otherwise, it's going to be in a much larger courtroom. Listen, when we come back, we're going to focus on the startling revelations in the Lori Vallow Daybell case. Stay tuned.
When the case first broke, Shanann and Cece and Bella were simply missing.
Like, I have no inclination to where they're at right now.
Something in your gut was telling you that he had something to do with it.
Chris Watts thought that he could go to the police department, knowing the fact that he killed his family.
Why should I believe you? Because I'm a very trustworthy person.
Breeze through a polygraph test.
Do you intend to answer all of the questions truthfully? Yes.
And welcome back, everybody. It is time to focus on Lori Vallow Daybell. That's the Idaho mother who was arrested, charged, and currently in jail awaiting trial in connection with the disappearance of her two kids, JJ and Tylee. They've been missing since September. It's a strange case where multiple deaths are surrounding her and her current husband, Chad Daybell. A lot of people want answers, a lot of questions. Well, Melanie Gibb, who is the best friend of Lori Vallow, sat down with Nate Eaton from East Idaho News for a 4-part interview. The revelations are shocking, shocking to say the least. Now, I want to play a bit right now where she talks about the religious beliefs of Lori and Chad. Watch.
Lori, from what I understand, said that she has been on 21 planets and Chad has been on 31. Have you heard that before?
I wouldn't say planets, but I would just say lives.
Lives. So she's had 21 lives, and he's had 31. That he was a holy ghost and has had 5 lives on this earth, and she's had 4 lives.
Correct.
And
well, no, I think she had 5 lives on this earth.
She had 5 lives on this. They both had 5 lives on this earth.
I believe so.
And Chad made a portal in Lori's closet so she can visit him. What does that mean? That sounds kind of crazy, I'll be honest.
It does. It does sound crazy. So a portal is something that he created for her. I don't know exactly how he did it, but maybe...
Like a box?
No, it's just a spot where he just maybe said a prayer or, however words he uses to create this portal. I don't know. I mean, I wasn't there. I don't know.
Sure.
But it's not like he could come through it physically, but it was a way for them to interact spiritually.
Okay, now, a lot to talk about. Kathy, Terry, I'm with you both. Kathy, your thoughts on this? You've been following this case. What have you been making of the interview so far?
I just can't with this case. Absolutely crazy stuff. The term you can't make this stuff up really doesn't apply here because it appears the stuff is made up. It's nonsense. And as you know, I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as Mormon. So I understand the beliefs of mainstream Mormonism. This is none of that. They are so far off. Literally, he's making stuff up. I don't get it. A portal in her closet. He was a holy ghost. 21 lives. None of that is mainstream doctrine. And Lori bought into it. I'm telling you, it's crazy.
Well, you never heard of a portal in a closet, Kathy? Come on. Now, Terry, let me ask you a question here. Here's the important question. Terry, what does this mean about what happened to the kids? Because there's a later part in the document, in the interview, where she talks about thinking JJ was a zombie, and right around the time that he disappeared. What does this tell you?
I think the important thing here is, what does Melanie Gibbs know about the children and what did she reveal to the police officers? She's sitting here doing an interview. She knew some information, and clearly Lori, quote unquote, threw her under the bus. But I think we need to remember that she does have some exposure here. She could be charged with accessory after the fact. Right now, it seems that she's cooperating with the police. She said that back in December, she told the police everything she knew. So I think she probably will escape charges. But if she knows anything at all about the whereabouts of these children, and I don't think she does, then clearly she needs to reveal that. So I think, unfortunately, that the children are no longer with us.
Well, I tell you, there's a part here where we can't forget that she admits that Lori told her to lie to the police about where JJ was and that JJ was with her. Now, that's not the only revelation. We also learned, well, Tammy Daybell, who was Chad Daybell's former wife and died under suspicious circumstances, that was brought up. And Melanie Gibb had this to say about Lori, because Lori was in a relationship with Chad, who was with Tammy. How is that going to work out with Tammy? Here's what Lori had to say.
She was uncomfortable with it. She believed that Tammy was going to pass away, though, before she got up there. And that didn't happen. She didn't pass away before she got up there. And so I thought, I said, aren't you uncomfortable? Maybe she'll see you guys together. And so I thought it was different, that she was going to be up there when Tammy was still alive.
And she told you, well, Tammy will die before I move up there.
Right.
How was she going to die?
I heard a few times maybe through a car accident or something like that.
Kathy, Tammy died. Charles Vallow died. Lori Vallow had said she thought both were going to die. She predicted this, and they wound up dead under different circumstances. Your thoughts about that revelation in this really unbelievable interview?
Look, what we learned in this interview is the first day that Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow met at a convention in St. George, Utah, back in October of 2018, Chad told her they had been married in multiple lives multiple times. Chad and Lori. That was the first revelation he gave her on the first day they met. So they thought that it was not going to be a big deal for them to be together in this life and that their current spouses would someday understand that. Then Charles Vallow ends up dead, and Chad asked Lori to move to Rexburg, Idaho, and she didn't want to go because he's still married to Tammy, but it was her understanding Tammy would be dead before she got there. Well, she got there and Tammy wasn't dead yet. I mean, come on, people. That's
the million-dollar question. Terry, is she going to be charged? Is Chad going to be charged? Are they both going to be charged in connection with the deaths of Tammy and Charles? Because as of right now, results are pending. One was ruled possibly an issue of self-defense. You tell me what's going to happen here.
Well, as we know, there was an April 9th letter from the Attorney General's office. They are now investigating this and working with local prosecution. If they uncover evidence that shows there's some connection between Lori and Chad and Tammy's death, and if it seems that the death of Charles Vallow really wasn't self-defense as far as, Alex Cox was concerned, then we could see charges connected to those deaths. And I think if there's a thorough investigation and they uncover facts, and we're seeing in Melanie Gibbs in this particular interview, more facts are being revealed in terms of, the thought that these two individuals were going to die before they died. So that's evidence of some premeditation as far as I'm concerned.
I could see this. I could see her being on the witness stand testifying against Lori Vallow. It's a pretty explosive interview, and it's only been part 2 has been released, so there's 2 more parts, and we're going to talk about it here on Law and Crime. Kathy, Terry, we'll be here to break it down. It just gets weirder and weirder. Thanks so much for coming on. Thank you, everybody out there. Everyone be safe, and we will be back on Friday with the stories.